Well, happy Wednesday, everyone. So I can't believe I have to pause to say happy Wednesday. These events are always on Wednesday, so it should clue me in. But in the time of the pandemic, I know we're all still sort of every day feels like like the same as every other day. So looks like we have a good group in the room. Thanks for joining us. We'll get started here in just another moment. As Liz said, if you were with us when she spoke up just a moment ago, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, share your LinkedIn, feel free to connect with others. We want this to be an opportunity for others, for community and connection. And if you're working on something that you want others to share, if you have your own live event, or your own firm, please feel free to share the links in the chat as well. Let's all connect with each other and have some community. So with that, I'm going to take down the slide and we will get started. I'm always afraid I'm going to hit the wrong button. There we go. Okay, well, welcome everyone. Happy Wednesday. Thank you for joining us for, is it week 10, Liz? Is that right? Week 10 of Hope, Heart, and the Human Spirit. I am delighted to be joined by my friend and colleague, Dr. Maya Bugg. She is phenomenal, so hope you all enjoy hearing from her today. Before we dive into Maya and the conversation we're going to have, for those of you who might be new to these weekly calls, thank you for joining us. We're so glad you're here. Hummingbird Humanity is a consulting firm that I started to work with organizations on creating human-centered workplace cultures. I really believe that there's a better way for us to do work that ultimately benefits the bottom line. I realize that we have to think about the bottom line, but I believe that the best way to get there is actually thinking about the humans and the people that work in our organizations as humans first. So in the spirit of that, I started this conversation series where we will talk with professionals who have lots of expertise to offer, but they're also humans first. And so this is an opportunity for us to get to know these amazing individuals, understand them as people, and also hopefully learn from them as well. And in the spirit of that, I invited Maya to join me today. So welcome, Maya. Happy Wednesday. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, Brian. Thanks for having me.
So for those of you who don't know, which I think is everybody except for Maya and me, Maya was one of the last people I got to hang out with before the pandemic. I was in Nashville, and Maya and I had a chance to work together about 18 months ago on a project, and I learned so much from her, and also just fell in love with her as a person. So we've stayed in touch and stayed connected. And so we had lunch when I was in Nashville, which is where Maya lives. And it's a little surreal to realize that that's almost 4 months ago now, and we're all still essentially in lockdown, it feels like.
Yeah, and it was just about a week or so after the tornadoes we had here in Nashville. So.
That's right. It was a tough time for the city.
Mm-hmm.
So Maya has two worlds that she's involved in, and actually I'm sure there's more than two. That's sort of limiting the power of Maya. She is the CEO of the Tennessee Charter School Center, and she's also the CEO of her own consulting firm, the Bugg Consulting Group, where she works in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we know each other because we were also both members of the Jennifer Brown consulting team. Colleague Liz, as it always happens, there's a phone that's going to ring. It happens. It's totally fine. The soundtracks of our lives.
Exactly. Brian, every time I try to turn off my phone, the iPhone iMessage, it attacks me. Like, it comes back. I don't know how to make it go away. I quit it. I turn it off. Always. So bear with me. Thank you.
No worries. Well, it just means you're human like the rest of us, and that's okay. So we're both members of Jennifer Brown Consulting community, as is Liz, who's with us today. Welcome back again, Liz. Thanks for being with us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Liz is fantastic. For those of you this is your first time, you'll get to know Liz in the chat. She will keep Maya and I on track as well and help to make sure that we don't miss your questions along the way. So Maya, I know I have I have shared a little bit about you. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the group about who you are professionally or personally that I haven't covered yet that would be just good for people to know?
You should know that I do have 3 little girls, 9, and twins that are 6. I have locked my doors in my office in hopes that they do not come into this interview at this time. So if you hear loud knocking, that's clearly a part of my world and my life. So you should know that I'm a proud mother. You should know I'm from Philadelphia, born and raised. And I think some of the rest of who I am will come out in the interview, but just know I've been doing this work for a long time. It's something that's near and dear to me. It's very personal for me. I've been working with students and companies and organizations for years, typically working on behalf of Black and marginalized communities. And I like to tell people this work is very personal, only a couple steps away. So yes, I'm able to say I'm a CEO, I'm doing this, and I've got these companies, but just a step away, I have cousins who will call me and say, Maya, I'm very tired of being poor, or fill in the blank, this person is experiencing this issue, right? So this is all very personal. This isn't hypothetical work for me. This isn't theoretical. This is real work that's impacting my family and others. So happy to jump into it and talk it through today.
I love that. Thanks, Maya. Thanks for sharing a little bit more. Well, I'll just go from there. The conversation around Black Lives Matter, which as many, if not all of us are aware, has really reignited in the last five plus weeks in response to the murder of George Floyd. Of course, his is the name that we often mention the most, but there's so many other names that we could mention as well who have lost their lives or who have been significantly impacted by the treatment of the Black community here and the United States in particular. Something though, for me as a practitioner, as I think back on the years of my work in HR or in diversity and inclusion, something feels different about this time. And part of that for me, I think, is also, if we would have had this conversation 2 months ago, I might have suggested that I have a good understanding of the challenges affecting the Black community. I will fully own that I understand now how much I had to learn, and I'm now aware that there's so much more for me to understand and learn. So that the fact that my eyes have been opened and I'm starting to have conversations that are different conversations that I would have had a couple months ago, and I'm leaning into learning and understanding in new ways, which is giving me a different perspective and on my role and the reality of what affects the Black community. So that, I think that's why it feels different to me, but I also realize I'm not in the Black community, and I'm curious for you as a member of the community, as a wife, as a mom, as a practitioner, does it feel different for you too?
It does feel different. And I don't have an explanation for why it was this time and this moment, and these names, George Floyd, these murders that sparked something, right? There's been thousands upon thousands of Black bodies killed and murdered for decades and centuries. So I don't know why this moment sparked this reaction, but I am encouraged by it. I am motivated and excited about it. But on the other hand, I am still pretty heartbroken about all that is happening, because at the end of the day, you still have Black people who are literally, we are begging for our humanity to be seen. Literally, you see pictures of people on their knees begging to be seen as humans. And that to me, yes, there's change and this is different, but we're still in a space where Black people are having to name this. We shouldn't have to put that your life matters on a sign, right? And so as a mother, you ask, how does that impact you personally? I told some of my friends, oh, the worst thing I ever had to do this whole quarantine, when one of my 6-year-olds accidentally overheard us talking about the George Floyd murder. She literally dropped to the ground and started sobbing. I had to rock her in my lap for a good 10, 15 minutes. She just couldn't understand it. I don't know where they got this from, but they don't call white people, they call them light skinned, which I think is hilarious. So she just wanted to know, why are light skinned people doing this? And why would the cops do that? And so, I didn't think in 2020 my 9-year-old would be on Roblox, that video game the kids are playing. And she's put on you can change her clothes. So she's put on a Black Lives Matter kind of outfit and changed her name on there to Black Lives Matter. It's 2020, and this is what my kids are I have to explain to them. So, again, I'm really excited about the spark. I don't know why it took so long. So I do question that. But it is still heartbreaking to have to beg to be seen as a human.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that and sharing your experience. What I've experienced in the last few weeks of just the access maybe is not the right word. The information that is coming my way for whatever reason is giving me a whole different lens. I'm having people now send me stories and articles and videos and messages, and just one after the next is more heartbreaking. And I'm grateful that I get that I get that information, because it helps me do the work that I do, but it's also so sad. And I hope that when I think about, well, certainly for you and your husband and your family and your loved ones, I want the world to be a better place, but certainly for your little girls. So hopefully this time and this momentum that's happening today, that we can sustain that. And that's something that worries me a little bit. Is what we know from past is that these movements have a spike in activity, and then they sort of settle into something that sort of blends with the rest of whatever we call normal. And this conversation needs a lot of energy for an extended period of time. I'm just curious, how are you thinking about that and processing that? Because you do have an interesting sort of intersection here, right? As you're a practitioner, you are a parent, you're a woman who is a Black woman, you are a CEO, as a leader, so you have all of these aspects of your identity and a role to play, as well as it affects you and your family in a very real way. So how are you thinking about that future of this work?
It is exhausting. As you can imagine, I get a lot of phone calls and texts. Apparently there was a message posted on Facebook that said for White people to check on your Black friends. So everyone started texting and posting, and so it is a lot to receive, because in my personal space, we're having these discussions. In my day job, we're having these discussions, and then in my consulting work, I'm leading these discussions. So it's a constant conversation and a kind of a waiting to see, is this going to persist? There's a lot of fits and starts. There's been hey, this is the name of the moment. We're all going to rally behind, and then it dies down. But as you mentioned at the top of the conversation, something seems a little different about this time. And again, I don't know why. But you see certain changes being made. Again, they are, they're not massive changes that are going to change behaviors necessarily, but they're symbolic at least, right? So you see the Confederate statues being taken down. You see the flags being changed. Again, these don't necessarily change my life directly, but they're symbolic in their steps in the right direction. And these are changes we had not seen in other moments like these in the past.
Yeah. Yeah, there is momentum. And one of my, I'll say, hypotheses, because I'm not sure it's one we'll ever prove one way or the other, but I believe that the pandemic and that we were all at home is what is certainly a conduit for why people are paying attention. I also would give credit to the millennials, who are, so many of them are now in the workplace, who say, hey, this isn't okay for me, and they challenge their employers and their leaders. And I encourage those activists inside of companies to keep pushing and keep challenging, because I think we need that. So I'm going to go to you as a professional, and then we're going to come back and we're going to intersect human and work as we go through the conversation. So we've talked a little bit about what the work that you do today, I know that some of the people that join our calls are early career professionals who particularly, there's several who I know who join who are early in deep diversity, equity, and inclusion work. How did you find your path into the work you do and the various roles that you play in the work today?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I grew up in Philadelphia, and I was supposed to be a doctor or a lawyer because that's what smart Black girls are supposed to do. You're at the head of your class. You were not supposed to go into education. But I had opportunities in high school to tutor. I went to the top public school, really in the tri-state area. We would walk up the block to tutor. And the children that we were tutoring could not read simple instructions. And what I couldn't understand is how is it that I go to the top school literally a block away, and you're going to a school in the same district in the same city, and you're not being taught to read. And that just didn't sit right with me. And then personally, with my family, there was always jokes around the school I went to, but I would see what my trajectory ended up being based on the quality of my school, and then what some of my cousins ended up having lesser opportunities because of the poor quality of their school. And so I decided that I was going to get off my career path of being a surgeon and to move into the education space. So I went into the classroom first, not with the intention to stay there, but I wanted to get an on-the-ground understanding of the system, because I knew after being in a classroom, I wanted to move into policy work. The reason I wanted to move into policy is because it takes decades, sometimes centuries, to change hearts and minds. But if you have smart policy that are implemented effectively with the appropriate consequences and incentives, you can change behaviors. And if you can change behaviors, you start moving closer towards building more equitable systems. So that's the path I wanted to be a part of and wanted to lead in. And so there's a balance between my work at the Charter School Center. I'm supporting and moving and advocating for equitable policies that impact primarily Black and Latino and low-income children, but whatever child decides to attend a public charter here in Tennessee, and making sure that they're not disadvantaged by the policies that are moved here in our state. On the other end, I'm doing, through the Bugg Consulting Group, I'm supporting companies and nonprofits across the country really to make their spaces more equitable and change their systems and policies. And so I like to plan. And so far the plan's working. The classroom has given me so many insights into how systems work and how people are impacted, the different layers of impact: teachers, families, students, the administrators, the community, the nonprofits serving the families that are attending the schools. It's all connected, this web. And so it's a great starting place for where I've come to now.
Well, I love that you chose to say I have different paths I can choose, which everyone has for professionally, but you chose to be guided by purpose is what I'm hearing of what is the difference you want to make in the world. Did I capture that right?
You did.
Yeah, and I think, and that certainly, of course, you and Liz will both know that that's something that I connect with. And I've gone on different paths over the course of my journey professionally, but it took me a few years to finally get there, but I said, I have to do this purpose-driven work. Like and I don't feel like I work anymore. I work hard. And as you will know, it's hard work, but to be in this space, but it's worth it. And it doesn't always feel like work. So as you are, as we were talking about the influencing the policy, the programming, the experience of students, one of the things that I keep hearing about is, and I've learned a little bit about it, and I need to learn and understand more about it, is how the curriculum is curated for our schools and the perspective of history that is taught. I know when we were having our prep call yesterday, something that struck me recently was, and actually it was 2 years ago that it struck me, but it really struck me in a different way recently, is I until 2 years ago, I didn't know about Juneteenth. And it is a significant event. And it feels like something that I should have learned in school, and that should have been honored and, I'll say, celebrated, because I know there's a celebratory aspect to it, but it's also a day to honor and remember sort of what happened and how we got to where we were and where we are today. And it wasn't part of my experience. So I'm, I know that since you happen to have this wonderful perspective, can you share with us more about the choices of what happens for history that's taught in schools or not taught in schools, and what I know you're doing some work to try to at least influence in your local world there, what's taught in the schools, and that's, in the local area in Nashville. But I need to know more.
Yeah. Well, we know that the systems that we are a part of are built to maintain and to codify white dominant culture, white supremacist culture. So what that means is that's going to fall into your education system as well, right? And so what you see in our textbooks and in our curricula is going to be a representation of that purpose, right? You have to maintain a certain history. And so what you see in our textbooks are the story of America without the stories of all the people who helped build the country and make America what it is. And so you all could probably name, if we played a game, name the Black people you learned about in school. I bet you we could all call out the same ones, right? We all had Harriet Tubman and Martin Luther King and so on and so on, right? And these are critical figures, yes, but what the push that I'm working on with a couple other parents in my spare time, personal advocacy for my children and children in our district, is what we see right now is that we only hear about and see people of color, in particular Black folks, in the curriculum at moments and points of trauma. So imagine for your child, for my child, sometimes she's the only Black child in the classroom. She could go throughout her whole schooling career, depending on who that teacher is and how they modify the curriculum. And the only time she and her peers would see someone who looked like her is if they're talking about how her ancestors used to be slaves, how they're talking about how her ancestors were hosed down in civil rights. And then maybe if they, put today's moment into the history books, they'll talk about how they were, Black people had to rise up around Black Lives Matter during a global pandemic, right? So all these are points of trauma. And that's just not sustainable. That's not healthy. That doesn't affirm identities of our children. And it definitely doesn't help white peers in the classroom better understand what's happening in society with our Black families, Latino families, for that matter as well. So yeah, you didn't hear about Juneteenth. I didn't learn about Juneteenth in my school either. My parents had to have special history books at home to teach me about some of these things. You could technically be in a household as a white person and never have to talk about race. Then you go to school, you talk about it those few times that I just named. You go to college, you don't have to talk about race or racism in college unless you're one of those cool hip kids who takes ethnic studies or an AFAMS course, but that's not required. So you get all through college, so on and so forth. You get to your workplace and only certain workplaces are talking about this. So you could presumably go through decades of your life and act as though you don't realize you're a raced person and you don't understand the other histories around you. And so you come to a point you have to figure out when do you say I didn't know versus let me go find out, because clearly there's other perspectives to be had and to be known.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Well, and there are two things that come to mind. One is, which I don't think I mentioned to you in our conversation yesterday, I read an article recently, which I need to find again because I need to post it, which was, the author was comparing I think it's tough to compare the experiences of different groups, and it's not about who was impacted more. It's about the tragedy that existed. And then this author was comparing. You may hear knocking in the background for me too. I'm also in a house with 3 little kids. there are 3 boys who are 6, 6, and 7 who fortunately love Mr. Brian, and they want to hang out with me sometimes. So if you hear the knocking in the background, that's those little boys. I mean, I guess we did talk about this because it was the author was talking about how, or made this comparison between the Holocaust and concentration camps. And the first part of the article was talking about how in Germany, that the kids are taught in school about what happened and how and what the Germany's role in the Holocaust, and they understand what that means, and they understand the importance of not returning to that. And the author also mentions that statues that celebrate those individuals who are leaders in the Nazi Party, they're banned, and so they don't exist, because we're not going to perpetuate that hatred in our monuments in that country. But then the author also compared concentration camps to plantations. And that was one of the moments that really surprised me, because of course everything that I remember reading and learning about plantations were, unless I have seen 12 Years a Slave, so I have seen some films and things that don't make it look like a pretty life or a good life. But most of what I remember is these plantations were centers of commerce that contributed to a successful country and the evolution of the United States. The comparison to the concentration camps, which I'm coming to understand, sounds like it's a more accurate depiction of what life was like. It surprises me of what we learn and what we don't learn. And I remember you were sharing yesterday about the plantations and your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about what's being taught in Germany about how you don't want to repeat that history, but that requires an acknowledgement that something was wrong, that this should not have happened, right? And I don't think we've had that as a country fully in order to put that in our textbooks and say we should not have inflicted these injustices and built this country on racism, right? So there's that. What I talked about yesterday is that, again, my parent work here, the district that we are in, and we've seen it elsewhere too, you have some really bizarre field trips and assignments that are given to the children. And so we had it where our 2nd graders were going to be taken to a plantation for a field trip. Slavery doesn't come into the standard course of study for Tennessee until 4th grade. They were not going to the plantation to learn about what it meant and the atrocities in the slave quarters. They were going to frolic. They were going to play and learn about, I don't know, colonialism. I'm not sure, but they were going to play. How disrespectful, right? How disrespectful. We had some families who attended field trips to the plantation, and the guide said, some slaves had it better than the folks, the white people in the neighborhood. They were well taken care of, right? So you have these narratives that are being shared with students and their families, and not one teacher stepped up to correct the statement. So there's bizarre things like that happen. That's not just a Tennessee thing. That's across the South. I was not used to plantation tours, coming from Philadelphia. So I was shocked when I got down south and noticed, like, this is a thing, y'all go and like hang out and have weddings on plantations. Why? Like, there's blood here. There's pain here. What are we doing? There's other things that happen across the South and that are bizarre to me. And fortunately, the district did work to start making changes about those field trips, which we appreciate. And so we're working to chip away to make sure that the district becomes more inclusive and just more aware of what that feels like to be a Black child on a field trip at a plantation, and your friends are playing on these sacred grounds.
Well, and those conversations and that awareness, I think that understanding is so important, and something that is certainly inherent to the work we do as diversity professionals, diversity inclusion professionals. And one of the something I hear from what you were just sharing around the way that those plantation experiences are curated continues to perpetuate white solidarity and white supremacy and the way that they're depicted. And I mean, one thing, just for those of you who are listening, who may not have, or watching, who may not have understood the definition of white supremacy, and I will, in the spirit of being open and honest, until about 3 weeks ago, I don't think I fully understood the definition of white supremacy. I always thought it as like, I'm not that person. No, I'm not a member of the KKK or one of those organizations. So I can confidently say that, but white supremacy is the concept that the world that we live in, certainly in the United States, is dominated by white images, white stories, white references, white choices. And one of the simple examples that comes to me, but is also poignant, I'm sure, without question, for children of color, is the crayons. Like the skin tone color that existed in crayons forever until recently it didn't really match white skin, but that was what it was intended to match. But there weren't colors for children who are Latinx or Black or from other communities of color, and so that choice and decision was made with a white supremacist mindset. It's about white as the dominant, and we're going to make sure that it meets that need, and it doesn't meet the other needs. And so the plantation tours remind me of that as well. Like, we're just going to center it around this story, and that story works for us, and it doesn't matter if it doesn't work or it doesn't work for others, because it works for us. So in the spirit of that, sort of continuing the conversation, I know the other thing that you mentioned to me yesterday was some of the other experiences that kids might have in school that might be, I'll say, well-intentioned activities, that their impact has a very different impact. And this question of cultural awareness and understanding is really sort of inherent there. So, would you share a few, example 2, 3, whatever you have in your mind of what some of those experiences are that you've seen or you've challenged or said, hey, let's think about this differently?
I'll share one. It
Sure.
will seem minor, but still impactful, I think. I don't know if you used to do those trace your family history projects when you were a kid. So there'll be some projects, a couple of them said, what are the names of the first people from your family to immigrate to America? Well, that seems maybe harmless, but I don't know. I don't know who my ancestors were. They were kidnapped from Africa. So, we have to talk to the teachers and say, unless you want me to tell my third grader how to come to your class and discuss the transatlantic slave trade, I think you should change this assignment, because it's not very inclusive. It's not inclusive to people who've been adopted, who don't know their family ancestry. And so nobody wants to be that kid who's standing there and say, I don't know. And the rest of the group is saying, well, my ancestors came from Ireland and mine came from Germany, or fill in the blank. But if you're not of that mindset, thinking about how to be inclusive and affirming of all the identities in your classroom, that's going to go over your head. You're going to miss that all day long. But think about, that seems small, but if those types of things and assignments are being given out semester over semester, year over year, course over course, imagine what that does to students, all students, but definitely to Black students and others who are being excluded.
Yeah, and that was eye-opening to me. It didn't play out in my head that way. When you first said the activity, it seems harmless at the beginning, but when you think it through, and that cultural awareness, and particularly when you expand it to other, like, children who are adopted, let's find another activity that works and allows for some research and some history if that's what's important, but let's find something that the kids can feel good about. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. The other one, actually, which is not the same question I asked there, but you were mentioning around representation of teachers who happen to be Black, and whether, the experiences your kids will have in school of whether they'll see a Black teacher. Did you say there was only one in their current school? Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah. There's one, and she left as of the end of the school year. So it's very possible that my kids will go through school and not have any Black teachers without unless the district makes it a priority to add racial diversity at the classroom level, leadership level, central office.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's usually easier for people to talk about diversity in that way, but it has to be prioritized in order for it to actually happen. Lots of research around the impact of racial diversity, and in particular teachers of color in the classroom, and the impact they have on all students, regardless of race. So yeah, we're doing, like I said, you mentioned earlier, I have 2 buckets of work. I have way more than 2 buckets of work, you know. Great out with the Charter Center, the really important work we're doing with clients across the country, and then advocating for my own children, and trying to make change in our district here as well. So, and I can add some more, but we don't have enough time.
You know, it's so funny when I have people who come to me and they make situations binary like that, or like, here, let's define this. When we're defining humans, the reality is there's so much more. So let's try to avoid the buckets too much if we can. But I appreciate that you advocate, you know, for your kids. That awareness of the importance of representation, I think, is also important. You know, the conversation you have to have with the teacher around the activity, around, you know, let's trace back to who was it, which of your ancestors came to the United States first. I'll say this with a caveat of, if there's diversity in the room, then, and who's making those decisions, and so there's people of diverse backgrounds, they get to have, hopefully, raise different questions and influence the decisions that are made, which I think is powerful, and that's important in every aspect of decision making. I also would say the caveat is, if there's the one Black teacher in the room, it is not that teacher's responsibility alone to have this understanding and awareness. And I realize they may take that responsibility and run with it as best they can, because they may want to own that and want to own the experience of kids, and I respect that. But I also challenge all of us to understand more, so it doesn't fall on that one individual. So as I say all of this, it makes me think about, you know, there's these conversations around representation, around equity in schools. There's this work you do about workplace policies, and there's, you know, policies around that drive curriculum. So there's this collection of things that are influencing what the decisions that get made, but at that strategic level of policy and initiatives and you know, what we're hoping to achieve. How do you see the connection between what's happening in corporate America and happening in education, and what are, you know, what are your hopes there?
Yeah, the students that we are talking about grow into adults, and they're the adults that are experiencing these workplaces. So when I'm talking to clients and partners, I tell them, you know, part of my work is to help you close opportunity gaps and make this space more equitable for adults. Because it's super easy for people to talk about equity in children, right? That's a bit safe. Yeah, we want equitable places for students, and we want more diversity in the teaching workforce. But when you start to move that conversation towards, we want more racial diversity, gender diversity, what have you, in leadership or in companies or in our nonprofits, then people get a little uncomfortable. On boards, people get more uncomfortable. People don't want to have that conversation as much. It's not as easy. And so the work that I do with clients across the country is really centered towards that. How are we going to make this space more equitable for everyone who works here? How are we going to make sure that you can't say, I just didn't know? So we do things like, people get stuck in that individual component of this. We don't have racism here. We're all nice people. We love each other. We're great. What are you talking about? There's no problem. They get stuck there, and what we try to push them to do is to, yes, have some self-awareness, but move into the institutional level of this. You have policies and practices and procedures that have inequities and exclusion embedded throughout. Some of them current leadership put in place, and some they've just been a part of the institution. It's the term institutionalized, right? So what I assume is most CEOs are not waking up and saying, you know what I'm gonna do today? I'm gonna make sure I pay all the ladies way less than I pay the men because I'm really excited to add to the gender pay gap. Like, that's not what they're thinking, but that's what they're doing because it's embedded in their policies and practices. So I help companies to dig through and audit their policies and practices to remove and pull out where are your policies advantaging certain groups and disadvantaging others. Why is that? I help them understand what is the experience that different team members are having within their organization. And then I help them think through a strategy. How do you make this so this is not just, you know, for example, we put up a really cool graphic to say Black Lives Matter and put out a statement for George Floyd, and now we, you know, pat ourselves on the back. So how do we make this stick? How do we make this authentic so that you're not just talking? You know, we get calls all the time. Can you come? We really want to do diversity and equity work. Can you come give us a training? And, you know, I just told somebody earlier today, you can't train your way out of being an anti-Black or a racist organization. You can't train your way out of that. That's not how this works. It takes a lot of intentionality and a lot of digging. And sometimes you dig up things you don't want to know, but you need to know. So that's how I connected. You know, the babies that we're talking about in these schools are the adults that are getting doors slammed in their faces and being excluded in the workplace. So that's the work I'm doing right now.
Thank you for the work you do. It's important and needed. Yeah, you know, as I think about what, you know, something you just said around you can't train your way out of it. It's not how it works. You know, it reminds me of I was having a conversation with an HR person at a potential client recently, and I put together a proposal which included a variety of steps in the process, and it wasn't going to solve everything. It's like, let's get it started. There's some steps we have to take, and those steps included conversations and training for the executive leadership team. And the HR person came back to me and said, our CEO wants to take those steps out of the process and just do the rest of it. And I said, you know, it's funny you say that because I was pondering this just, you know, before we got in our call today. And I said, something I wanted to make sure I share with you. Well, first of all, we shouldn't remove those steps. It's really important that those steps remain. We need the CEO and the leaders to be part of the work. It has to come from them and have to be involved in it. I also need us, before we sign anything, before we agree to anything, you and I need to meet with your CEO together. Now, I stopped short of saying I'm not going to do the work if we don't have that meeting. The reality is that was the next conversation. I was laying paving the way for that potential conversation of, you know, part of, I think, my commitment here is, could I go earn a paycheck to do some work? Sure, but I don't do this work just to make a paycheck. I do this work to make a difference. And you know, so I think it takes us, you know, people like you and me and others who are saying, I'm not going to just say, yeah, I'll do that for you. I'm going to make sure you understand what you need to do, why you need to do it, how we're going to drive change. I'm not going to help you just check the box. That doesn't work for me, but it's not easy. I mean, you have bills to pay too, I'm sure. So.
Yeah, but I also have to operate with a certain integrity, and this work is already hard. I'm not here to help you check boxes and play games around this. I have other folks who are ready to do the work. They don't know what the work is yet, but they want to do something. I'm here to support those folks. But if you're just kind of playing games around this and checking a box, as I already said, I got a lot of stuff going on, Brian. I don't have to, don't waste my time. I got a lot to do, okay? So, you know, we're going to do this or we're not. Yeah. Everything will get figured out. I am not going to be driven by a check, right? I'm not going to be driven by the contract. There's plenty of contracts out here, so many contracts out here to grab if you want them. And I think part of our work is pushing clients to know what good choices are and pushing the envelope so that they understand this is bigger than checking a box. And if you're going to be receptive to my candor, then we can keep moving here. If not, I have so many other clients and people who want to really get this right, and I'll spend my energy there.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I really like what you said we have to have integrity in this work. But it's the only way I can get in front of the room or have those conversations is to have that integrity. And to your point, like we need to be able to have real conversations and say real things. We can't dance around what needs to be said. That's not going to get us to where we need to go. And I think I said this at the beginning of the conversation as I was talking about the firm that I started, which has parallels to what your firm and the work you do of. If we do the right thing for the people, that we get that these companies have to make a living, have to make money like that. We get that they have to make money to pay their employees and to do what they do and to give back to their shareholders. But you can do that by taking care of your people and doing the right thing. So I'm curious. Certainly, I want to ask if there's any questions. We still have a few more minutes with Dr. Bugg. By the way, I think that's the coolest name. Dr. Bugg. It makes me smile, and it's also professional. I love it.
I never heard of a bug until I met my husband. So what is his name? He emailed me when we were in college. I never opened it up. The internet was so new because I thought it was like a virus, like trying to attack my system or something. Like, what is this bug thing? So I never heard of this before in my life, but now I hear the name all the time. So I will hold and keep the name. It's cute.
It's cute. It's like I'm tough and fierce, but I'm also sweet and kind of cute. I love it.
Kind of cute. I thought I was in kind of nice day, but just messing.
Good for you. I love it. Well, you look fantastic. Well, you always look. I would love to see when you don't look fantastic. I have a feeling you always look fantastic. So, well, I want to. She's like, I'm not going to go there, and that's okay. Well, as we've sort of gone to the personal side, of course, if there are questions for Maya here that around her phenomenal experience and what she has to offer, feel free to ask. But I want to ask you a couple just more personal questions as I like to wrap up with some personal questions when we can. So I'm curious, what brings you joy? We've talked a lot about you have more than 2 jobs, as we covered. You have very intense work and very tough work and very important work that you do. You're a mom, you are a wife, you are a CEO. You have all these things that you have to do that are responsibilities. But what brings you joy? How do you find the joy in your life?
Oh, I love to see my girls playing together, like squealing, tickling each other, like just being silly. That just brings me so much joy in the middle of a really hectic day. If I hear little squeals and just them, sometimes they just go up to each other and just hug each other and kiss each other. It is amazing. The other thing that brings me joy is just knowing that in these times of, chaos and craziness, that we still have the capacity to find little nuggets of happiness around us, right? Whether it's laughing hysterically with your girlfriend, on your Friday night virtual happy hour, or, dancing, listening to your favorite song, or just holding someone's hand that you love. It's like these moments of happiness, and you have the capacity to still feel that, even though there's chaos swirling violently at times around us, and that brings me joy.
I love that. Those moments of humanity in your life.
Moments of humanity and just a moment of pause and calm to bring that happiness. It goes a long way.
Yeah, so I think it's so easy for us to get caught up in all of the things that are happening, and actually with the work that we do, I'm sure for you, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I have not met another practitioner in the diversity space who hasn't said the last 6 weeks have been 6 of the busiest weeks they've ever had because of this work. I think we all have to remind ourselves that, well, one, we have to have self-care, and we have to take care of ourselves. That's the only way we can show up to do the work we do. but then actually one of the things that I chose to do this past weekend was I actually decided not to work this weekend. I just said, I'm just going to take a break. And I had to say, thanks, Liz. And I was supposed to email Liz something, and she didn't give me a hard time about it until yesterday. She's like, hey, Brian, did you just, and I'm like, I just took a break. I just had to take a break. And people understand it, of course. But this work and what we need to do, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And we have to take those moments to pause. So it doesn't look like we've had any questions come in. So, as we wrap, wind down here, I'm actually going to put up a slide for just a second, and then I'm going to come back to you, Maya, with 2 final questions. Let me see if I can put the slide up. This is where the technology is. Let's see if I can do it. Sometimes it doesn't work. It works. So I just want to plug our guest for next week, Heather Mcarthur, who is a consultant with the Executive Advisory. She's also an author. She wrote a book called Low Man on the Totem Pole. She's an Army veteran. I know Heather because she was an executive coach for me when I worked at the Walt Disney Company, and I learned a lot from her. So I'm excited that, this is Maya's slide. This is Heather's slide. That Heather's going to be with us next week. So I hope you'll join us and hear some about Heather's story. And some of what the words of wisdom she has to offer. Actually, there's a article she wrote for Forbes that has become about having conversations around racism in the workplace that I have shared many times, and I didn't actually realize she wrote it until last week. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is Heather's article. So come hear a little bit from Heather. So as we wind down, Maya, I want to ask what is your hope for the future? As you think about all of these hats you wear, and the multiple jobs you have, as you have you do work that is intended to drive change. You're a parent. What is your hope for the future? And I'll actually add one part to that. What would you, all of us that are listening or watching, what would you encourage us to do if we are allies, or if we're members of the Black community and we're trying to find our way through this tough time? So what is your hope for the future, and what would you challenge us or encourage us all to do who are listening and watching?
I think I would challenge us to all recognize that we're in a very important space right now where the understanding of anti-Blackness is bubbling up. And that's not something that we were talking about loudly anyway, or publicly until recently. Well, let me rephrase. Certain white citizens and friends and allies were not saying the phrase around anti-Blackness until recently. And so my challenge is that we sit with that and we wrestle with what is anti-Blackness, which has been at the base of our culture as a country since its inception. And that's not to discount other racisms and inequities, but there's something very peculiar and specific around anti-Blackness. So I challenge us as DEI professionals to be able to pull that out specifically, sit with it, name it, and then work towards how do you make it something more affirming towards Blackness? How do you make it not anti-Black? How do you make it these companies and these clients you're working with be ready to name that? And so my hope is that we're able to move forward in these conversations, and that in terms of our work as equity consultants, that we're helping these companies to not just say they want to be more equitable and more diverse, but they actually do it. They go from intention to action. Otherwise, we're all just spinning our wheels here. So that is my hope. My hope is that my girls, when they have their kids, if they decide to be parents, that they're not looking at pictures of people literally begging to be seen as humans. We don't need this to move into yet another generation. So that's my hope.
Thank you, Maya. I'll share that hope with you. I hope that everyone can see, like, to live in a world that they're seen as humans. And today, that the conversation that's really important, and it's going to be important for a long time to come, is that we have that conversation around the Black community, and that we continue the conversation, and that we take action to make change. The last thing I'll just want to mention to the group is, it was sparked by something you said of sitting with an understanding that the world that we were brought up in, and the world that I was brought up in, taught me to be racist and taught me to be biased. And that's hard. I don't like that. It feels bad. It feels uncomfortable. And the only way that I can do something about it is to understand that, and then and do my best to make sure that my choices are better than what the world taught me. And I would just share with the group that as I continue to do that, even just saying that, it feels uncomfortable. I don't want to say those things about myself, but I also have to be aware and acknowledge that that's part of what the world taught me. And that's true for all of us. So we're not alone in that. But sitting with the discomfort is the way that we're going to make change. So I thank you for sharing your story, for providing us another story to hear and understand, and challenging us to help make the world a better place. Thank you for being with us.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. Thanks for having me, and congratulations to you on Hummingbird and everything that you're moving forward.
Thank you. It's a new adventure. I'm grateful to have people like you and Liz and everyone who joins. It makes it fun. It's a new way to build community and connection and to make a difference in the world. So thank you again to everyone who joined us today. I wish you a wonderful Wednesday. Stay safe and be well. We'll see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.